This movie follows the story of the day an established singer finds out that she has a brain tumor. In the opening scene, we see the protagonist Vivian at a doctor's office, looking rather anxious. Scanning the room, all she sees is worried people and hears disturbing noises that make her nervous. On the phone, she speaks with her band member when a nurse asks her to stop talking. Vivian let her colleague know that she'll be late before hanging up the phone. However, the noise in the office and the loud beeping make her hands shake, so she decides to play some music. However, as she puts her headphones in, a nurse calls her in. In the office, the doctor shows the scan of her brain, where two large black spots can be noticed. She explains that Vivian has an aggressive brain tumor that will most likely mess with her cognitive abilities. Concerned, Vivian asks about her singing, and unfortunately, the doctor confirms that it will be affected as well. Vivian starts shaking as tears begin to fall down her cheeks. Trying to calm herself down, she apologizes and asks the doctor for more information. The doctor lets her know that they will be performing surgery on her in combination with radiation, which will expand her life, but only to 14 months. Lastly, she advises to gather her friends and family, in case there's a problem. Walking out of the office, Vivian puts on her headphones quickly and rushes to get out. On the street, she notices some of the things she usually doesn't, from people talking to fighting, and even kissing. She notices it all in the busy streets of New York. Lost in her thoughts, she gets pushed by a civilian, and shortly after by another one. Regardless, she continues to walk when she gets a call from her concerned mother. Asking where she is, her mother scolds her for not answering her calls. Finally, Vivian makes it to her practice, where a rather annoyed Ben waits for her. She apologizes, but claims that everyone loves her, so therefore she won't get in trouble. Ben confirms, but reminds her that it's very unprofessional to be that late. She knows it's unprofessional, but instead of explaining herself, she decides to keep quiet. Little does Ben know that his friend is slowly expiring. On their way up, he reminds her about an interview she has in the afternoon. Before they enter the room, he informs her about the offers in Amsterdam. Looking down, Vivian smiles as she remembers the great times they've had in Amsterdam. However, she starts to worry about the other performances. Luckily, Ben assures her that everything is fine and that the tickets are selling, so she calms down. They finally enter the rehearsal room, and she starts apologizing while poking fun at their busy schedules. After greeting everyone, they finally start the rehearsal. Back at the apartment, her mother waits impatiently while smoking her cigarette, wondering where her daughter is. Halfway through the rehearsal, Vivian chats with Jordan, the drummer of the band. He caresses her hand as he invites her for a cup of coffee. Unfortunately, Vivian has an interview in the afternoon, so she let him know that she's unavailable. Walking away from him, she leaves the room, knowing that he will follow behind. Walking up the stairs, Vivian remembers her scan, and it suddenly makes her sad. However, Jordan comes up behind her, and they head into the room and start kissing. Everyone knows that they're hooking up, which is why Ben asks them to leave the room spotless, because he doesn't plan on paying for it. After finishing the rehearsal, she decides to walk around for a bit. Just on the sidewalk, she notices a man with his bike, screaming at who she assumes to be his girlfriend. Disturbed by his behavior, she can't help but look. Regardless, she decides not to intervene, and as she continues her walk, she comes across a beautiful sparkly dress. Walking into the shop, she asks to try it on. While the worker goes to look for it, Vivian looks around the shop. Coming across a mirror, she admires herself before the lady hands her the dress to try it on. Vivian puts it on, but as she checks it out in the mirror, she can't help but notice the band-aid on her arm. It reminds her of the tumor, so she rips it off swiftly. After purchasing the dress, she calls the journalist for the afternoon interview to ask for a location change. Shortly after, we see Vivian arriving at the place. They exchange a couple of words about the restaurants she used to go to before getting to the interview. Setting the phone down to record their conversation, the journalist asks what Vivian is grateful for after a long career in singing. Not sure how to answer the question, Vivian starts off slow, but ends up giving a solid answer, promising that she's not done yet. Finally, the journalist asks about her new album, and while Vivian is excited to talk about it, the reporter wants to know whether her breakup from the previous year inspired her work. Keeping it classy, Vivian lets her know that she takes inspiration from life for everything she does. However, the journalist longs for a specific answer, so she asks the same question again. Knowing that she won't stop unless she gives her something, Vivian tells her that all of her albums are inspired by her previous heartbreaks. Having gathered enough information, the journalist packs her things, shakes Vivian's hand, and makes her way out. Finishing yet another task, Vivian continues wandering the streets of New York just to be away from her mother. Coming across the bar she's performing at the same night, she decides to stop by. As she walks in, a sweet older man smiles as he sees her and seems to be more excited than Vivian for her performance. Suddenly, Vivian's phone rings, so she decides to head out. Answering, she hears the voice of her taxi driver and hurries out so as not to miss him. A black car pulls up, so she hurries over to it, trying to avoid the pouring rain. Right off the bat, the driver gives her bad vibes, but once he starts arguing on the phone in a language Vivian can't understand, she begins feeling uncomfortable. Ignoring him doesn't work, as his loud screaming scares her. As he hangs up, Vivian assumes that he will calm down. Instead, he plays a loud song on the radio, and when she asks him to lower the tone, he doesn't do it. Having had enough, Vivian gathers her things and asks him to stop the car. Once he does, she bolts out, visibly disturbed. As she gets to the door, she takes a deep breath before confronting her mother. Walking in, she can hear the footsteps of her mother approaching her, and once she does, he starts interrogating her about the band. She wants to join the rehearsal to watch sometimes, but Vivian thinks it's unnecessary, so she tells her that non-members are not allowed. Begging not to be attacked by any more questions, Vivian goes to the kitchen for a glass of water. However, her mother follows, only to let her know that they need to have a conversation about the lack of selling tickets for the show. Not sold out and not selling are not the same thing, is what she tells her mother. But her mother goes on about how she appreciates her willingness to keep pushing after so many disappointments. Asking her to stop, Vivian hurts her mother's feelings, which makes her go quiet. Going to her room, Vivian takes a deep breath as she's left alone after an eventful day. Sitting on the bed, she sees a picture of her daughter and loses it completely. Quietly sobbing to herself, she rocks back and forth, not knowing what to do. All of a sudden, she remembers the dress she bought earlier and remembers forgetting it in the taxi. Rushing out of her room, she sees her mother packing her things. Asking her not to leave, she gets ignored. Hugging her from the side, she still gets no reaction. So she slides down and nugs her way into her mother's arms, making her laugh. Vivian lets her know that she's going to retrace her steps to find the lost dress, so her mother offers to join. However, Vivian assures her that she'll be fine. Asking when the next performance is, her mother expresses a desire to be there, but Vivian doesn't give her an answer. Just outside the building, Vivian sees some kids having fun, which brings a smile to her face. Her phone starts ringing, so she snaps back, but once she answers, she understands that they're calling her from the hospital. The nurse on the other line seems nice, but it's all too much for Vivian to handle. As she hangs up the phone after confirming her appointment, she gets dizzy, so she grabs onto the nearest thing. A car horn brings her back, and when she turns, she sees her driver from earlier. Relieved, she walks to the front seat to get her bag. However, he opens the window, only to tell her that it's in the back seat. Opening the back door, she gets her bag and closes the door. As she speeds off, she runs after him, and luckily he notices her. Opening the back door again, he asks whether he can drop her off at an address, but he lets her know that he's talking on the phone. Assuring him that she doesn't mind, she's taken by surprise when he tells her that she can't tell him what to do in his car. He's on a phone call that doesn't need to be heard by anyone, so he makes sure to tell Vivian. Not knowing how to respond to his unnecessarily rude attitude, she just closes the door and heads her way. Taking a different taxi to her next destination, she arrives in no time. After passing the friendly security guy, Vivian heads up the stairs to a specific apartment. Knocking on the door, her ex-husband opens it, and is surprised to see her there unannounced. He lets her in and goes back to the kitchen. They talk about their daughter, and how the events she's participating in are on the same date as her shows for the tour. Her ex-husband lets her know that their daughter would appreciate it if she were to come. So feeling bad, Vivian promises to change a couple of dates. Remembering the tumor, she tells him that the tour may not be happening. And when he asks why, she goes to tell him, but hears the door open. Their daughter walks in, so Vivian suggests she stop by when her daughter falls asleep. Unaware that it's serious, he suggests she come over the following day, and thankfully, she won't listen to him. She's excited to see her daughter as they make small talk. The breakfast is done, so she decides to let them eat. On the way out, Vivian begins to feel dizzy, and her ex-husband notices that. He asks whether everything's all right, and she lies that she's fine. As he closes the door, Vivian pushes her body against the wall for support, trying not to break down while regaining her consciousness. To ease her mind, she decides to enjoy the fresh air outside. After taking it all in at the park, she heads to the bridge and stares at the blue water far ahead. Shortly, an elderly woman joins her, looking at the beauty in front of them. Excitedly, she tells Vivian that she has seen a whale as big as a truck swimming in the water. Vivian smiles, so the elderly woman assumes that she doesn't believe her. She walks away without saying anything else. Taking out her phone, Vivian calls Ben, asking him to hang out. He agrees to meet at their usual place, so Vivian prepares to tell him the tragic news. On her way to the bar, she sees people in various situations in life, from sad and lonely to happy and in love. It saddens her as she sees an elderly couple, knowing that she won't live up to that age. Regardless, she continues her walk until she gets to a house with its blinds down. Holding a knot, she peeks through the gaps, but can't seem to see anything. Continuing her walk, she spots a selling ice cream on the street, so she decides to have one. Contemplating which flavor to get, she ends up choosing vanilla just to be safe. But once she takes a bite, she throws it in the trash. A trash bin in front of a restaurant where an old friend of hers happens to be celebrating her birthday. Tessa recognizes Vivian, so she calls out her name, surprised to see her. Vivian gives her a hug while wishing her a happy birthday. Tessa invites her to join them, but Vivian lets her know that she's meeting Ben at the bar. Instead, they invite her for a drink, to which she agrees. They walk in, and Vivian greets the table before she and Tessa move to the bar to catch up. Given that they haven't seen each other in 5 years, Tessa asks to be filled in on all the details, since it is hard for her to go out having such young children. Vivian is surprised to hear that she has 3 kids, so she makes sure to congratulate her. Tessa thanks her, and doesn't miss the chance to congratulate Vivian on her world tour. However, she also congratulates her on her engagement, unaware that Vivian called it off the previous year. Tessa apologizes, feeling bad about mentioning it, but Vivian assures her that everything is fine. Moving on from the topic, Tessa asks about her daughter, and Vivian lets her know that she's doing well, living with her father. Asking for a cigarette, Tessa suggests they go outside. As they get out, Tessa complains about not having time for anything, let alone her career. However, she is convinced that there's time, and will eventually branch out in her field. Despite knowing that time is precious, Vivian agrees with her. A text message gets her attention, and as she checks it, Tessa notices a smile on her face. Curious, she asks who it is, and Vivian reveals that her drummer texted her. Judging by the look on her face, Tessa is convinced that she's sleeping with her drummer. Vivian tries denying it, but ends up admitting that she is. Luckily, Tessa's friends come looking for her, so Vivian gets out of the situation. However, as Tessa gets inside, Vivian watches through the glass as her friends and family gather around and sing her a birthday song. She brushes it off and heads to the bar, where she has to perform. After listening to her friends sing a beautiful song, it's Vivian's turn to get on stage. Greeting the crowd, she gives the notes to her drummer and begins singing shortly. After a beautiful performance of a slow song, the crowd cheers Vivian's name as she stands, taking the appreciation in. Her drummer finally gets to her, but even though she tries denying his romantic gesture, they end up sleeping together back at his apartment. Vivian wakes up in the middle of the night, puts her clothes back on, and takes the small broken mirror to fix her face. After doing so, she takes a look at her drummer, who is sleeping peacefully, and decides not to disturb him. Gathering her stuff, she takes one more look at him before exiting his apartment. Getting in a taxi, she looks up only to see the man who drove her earlier. She comments on how it's a coincidence, getting excited, but he shuts her off by claiming that it's very common in New York. Given that he's been driving all day, Vivian asks whether he's getting home soon, and the man explains that he'll only go home if he wants to, because he and his wife are fighting. She nods her head and decides to keep quiet. However, the driver comments on the melody in the background and its creator. Vivian smiles and agrees with him. The first nice thing they exchange. All of a sudden, Vivian gets an idea and asks whether her destination could be changed, with which she doesn't have a problem. Listening to the melody and feeling the warm breeze of the New York night, Vivian puts her head out of the window to enjoy the experience. Once they arrive, she asks him whether he can wait. He's hesitant at first, but they settle on a good price for him to wait until 8 in the morning. Vivian hurries her way to the apartment, lying to the guard that they're expecting her. Knocking on the door, she doesn't hear any movement on the other side, so she decides to knock harder. Her sleepy ex-husband opens up, visibly upset to have been woken up at such an hour. She reminds him of her words, but he doesn't seem to care. The only thing he cares about is for their daughter not to be awoken. But his hope goes down once Lucy appears from her bedroom. The ex-husband is more than annoyed, but Vivian heads to her room to wish her a good night. Lucy reveals that she hadn't been asleep, and shows her mother what she's been up to. Taking her headphones, she hands them to Vivian and asks her to listen. She listens to the sweet melody and the nice tone of singing when she realizes that it's Lucy. Curious, Lucy asks about her opinion, and Vivian assures her that she loves it. They continue making small talk when Lucy notices that there's something on her mother's mind. She lets her know that she's freaking her out by being so serious and sad, and therefore asks what's wrong. Vivian lies about everything being all right and tries to cover up her sadness by claiming that she's over touring. Lucy knows that she's lying because Vivian loves touring more than anything, but she allows her to change the topic as Vivian hands her the sparkly dress she bought that day. Looking at the pretty dress, Lucy asks whether she's loaning it to her, and it takes her by surprise when Vivian lets her know that it's hers. Deciding to go to bed, Vivian tucks her in, and Lucy lets her know that she'll be there for her next gig on Saturday. Feeling the support from her daughter, Vivian gets sad because she knows that she's missed a lot. Surprisingly, Lucy assures her that it doesn't matter because she likes her far more than her friends like their mothers, despite them being present in their lives. Vivian smiles before heading to the living room, where her ex-husband is. An old French movie lights up the living room as it plays on the TV, making Vivian chuckle at his obsession with such movies. Sitting down, Nick notices that something's on her mind as well. Gathering the courage, Vivian starts small by mentioning the headaches she's been having. He recalls her telling him, but once Vivian falls quiet, he asks whether it's serious. Unsure, she tells him about the tests she'll be taking in the morning. Nick gets pissed off at the lack of responsibility, reminding her that it's not just about her all the time. Knowing that he's right, she asks him to stop and spare her a little bit. Looking into her eyes, he begs her to be honest with him so they can figure out a way to tell Lucy. Tears start filling her eyes, so she decides to leave. Before she can get up from the couch, he grabs her hand and apologizes for his reaction. Instead of leaving, she goes to Lucy's room and lays on the bed where she lies asleep. After some time, she moves to the ground with her legs close to her chest. It all hits her at the same time: her illness, the knowledge that she doesn't have long to live, and most importantly, the many times she wasn't there for her daughter. She begins to sob quietly, trying not to wake Lucy up as her heart breaks into a million pieces. Waking up in the morning, Vivian gives Lucy a big kiss on the head before exiting her room and letting her sleep peacefully. Seeing Nick asleep on the couch, she decides not to disturb him. After looking around the apartment and saying goodbye to it, she leaves and is ready to finally go to her own apartment. Before she does though, she calls Ben and reveals the truth about being unwell while crying on the phone. She's changed her clothes and is packing her bags when she stops to kiss her sleeping mother before leaving for the appointment. Getting into the taxi, she lets him know where they're going, and once he realizes they're going to a hospital, it's like he knows that she's in question. Regardless, he starts the ride and asks whether she's had enough sleep. As expected, she lets him know she hasn't slept well, and he reveals that he hasn't either. As he continues to drive, she ends up falling asleep, and he doesn't wake her up until they're at the hospital. Seeing a coffee stand, she suggests they get a coffee, and the man agrees. He gets tea for himself and coffee for her, but as he hands her the cup, she remembers that she can't be having anything before the appointment. Regardless, he promises to hold it for her until she finishes. Vivian smiles, and they stay silent for a while. However, she lets him know that she'll be fine and won't be needing him to wait for her. He asks whether she's sure, and she assures him that she is. Standing up, she takes her bag and heads to the entrance of the hospital. However, she turns back to the man halfway, and they simply stare at each other. No words are being exchanged, but many things are understood. Finally, she starts walking to the entrance when Ben walks out of the hospital. She walks slower as he rushes to embrace her in a hug. Taking her bag, he helps her to the entrance as they hold each other, like the true best friends they are. Before the appointment, we see Vivian take off her jewelry, take a deep breath, and bravely prepare for whatever the future holds, despite being petrified.